Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the VSI Executive Education with Kinsey Sears. As normal, this is getting the reputable Tom Sears involved in everything we're doing with regards to this. And today we've got some special guests on from the cricket world. We've got Richard Gould from as Chief Executive of Surrey Cricket, and Gordon Hollins, the CEO of Somerset Cricket, which should be entertaining. Now, for those of you that are our participants on this particular course, you will be eligible to ask some questions. You're like the studio audience. Those of you that you are watching this live on YouTube, unfortunately, you can't ask any questions. So anything you write in there, you may still be charged for, and we will not get to see. So if you're in the audience and you want to ask a question, I think what we'll do is either write the questions in the chat box or use the Q&A and raise your hand sort of thing if you want to ask it yourself. And then when we come to the end of this interview, we will get you to ask your questions and then we will go from there, okay? So without further ado, the amazing Mr. Sears, who's in the wonderful, beautiful south where the sun is delightfully shining. We're not actually sure what that yellow ball is in the sky when we're up north, but Tom, over to you, my friend.
Thanks, Tim. The sun always shines on the righteous. You should know that. Afternoon, everybody. Great to have you back, and a warm welcome to two old friends of mine, Richard Gould and Gordon Hollins, who I've worked with extensively over the years in many capacities. Guys, great to have you on, and thanks for making time. Obviously, we want to talk in detail about cricket. The summer's been decimated by the current situation. Just run us through the current state of play where you both are at Surrey and Somerset. Gordon, perhaps you can start because you had the perfect timing of taking the job, starting for a week and then everything going into lockdown.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting induction programme, Tom, that is for sure. But look, I mean, obviously the circumstances that we're all dealing with in sport, not just cricket, are quite exceptional. And that what you have to remember at all times through this is the well-being of people. I mean, we have got hundreds of people dying each day on average, and sport is a small part of that big world. But obviously, our responsibility is to look at how we can get cricket back into a normal space and provide entertainment for fans and followers of the game, and that's very, very challenging. But we've broken this into three strands really. One is well-being in terms of our crisis management plan, and it's certainly no exaggeration to call it that. The well-being of our staff, first and foremost, including our players and cricket support staff, our members of the club, and our guests who come into the Cooper Associates County Ground. So we had to take that into consideration immediately, and then very quickly decided that the safest way to deal with this towards the end of March was to shut the ground down. And that was based on government advice, but actually was comforting from my perspective, from a well-being perspective, from all the people that I've listed there. And then the financial stability, because obviously you're operating, as every sports business is at the moment, operating in a vacuum of income, where you've still got costs and you've got absolutely virtually zero income coming in, and I mean virtually zero income coming in. And I think within 72 hours of my starting, we went from bringing thousands of pounds a day into literally zero in. And so nobody has made a bigger impact on income in their first week as CEO than I have, that's for sure. But so the financial stability is obviously a constant challenge, given the uncertainty, Tom, and we don't have certainty, as the rest of the world doesn't have certainty on absolutely anything. And that makes financial planning very, very challenging. So we've obviously had to take some measures. We've furloughed a lot of our staff, the vast majority of our staff. We've obviously tried to take costs out wherever we possibly can, and steady the ship in the short term, pending more information becoming available. And then the third strand of our plan has been communications, to try and ensure in such a rapidly changing environment that we are communicating properly with our staff, with our stakeholders, and with other parties. And that's been probably the most challenging of the lot, because literally what we had on Saturday was different to Sunday, was different to Monday. So you're constantly wrestling with that. But have we dealt with it? I'm sure that we will review we will review. History will tell us how we've dealt with it, but there'll be lessons learned everywhere, I'm sure, in every business. But I'm generally comfortable where we are, if not happy with where we are.
Thanks, Gordon. Richard, how are things at the Oval?
Sunny, and Lee the groundsman is mowing the pitches as we speak. But it's weird, frankly. Same as any city or town or village, there's just devoid largely of people. Although last couple of weeks you've seen more and more people coming back in and around, and today clearly is busier again. I echo everything that Gordon has said in terms of business. You know, we work in a conference, events, sports business, and all those elements have just stopped. I suppose whereas sports clubs were different is that we've got a very loyal supporter base, and we're getting a lot of support from those quarters. They understand the difficulty that the clubs are going through, and the fact that our businesses are clubs, not just businesses, I think ultimately will provide an opportunity for us to get through this in the long term. You know, we've seen how the MCC are already keeping hold of members' subscriptions for next year, and I know lots of other cricket clubs will be looking to do the same sort of thing. And in a normal business, people will be saying, hold on, you know, if I'm not having the flight or if I'm not having the holiday, I want my money back and I want it back now. Whereas in clubs, it's a little bit different because people want their club to exist next year and the year after. And I think that's where, despite the very difficult circumstances, we do have an advantage over other businesses, because we're not just a business. We're a sport that people follow with great passion.
How realistic is it to expect a return to playing in the sort of near future? Obviously, we've seen the government guidelines revised earlier this week. What insight do you have on that and the protocols that you'd need to put in place to make that possible?
I'm really positive. Positivity is largely born out of ignorance, but in this instance, ignorance is kind of relevant because there's so many things that we don't know about the disease and how it spreads and all the rest of it. And perhaps the more we learn, the more confidence we'll get in terms of some kind of return to normality sooner rather than later. The government clearly wants sport to return for a whole variety of reasons, and we can see in terms of football, Premier League clubs are already back training. I think Championship clubs are back training next week, and I'm sure it won't be long before the cricketers are back training thereafter. I think the concept is that athletes will come back and train on an individual basis in the first instance. Then they will move into small groups, and then, as we know from the Premier League, they're hoping to play in mid-June. And I think Test match cricket is hoping to return sometime in July, sometime around there. So, you know, I think we've got milestones. Whether we hit them is another matter. It'll depend on the vagaries of the situation we're in.
Gordon, what about the prospects for domestic cricket at grounds like Taunton?
Well, who knows? I would echo everything that Richard just said in relation to it's very important that we remain upbeat and ready, and that we are ready to take that on when we get the opportunity to, if we get the opportunity to. Is certain. So I think that it's really important to remain positive and ready, and I'm confident that Taunton will be ready at the same time as anyone else would be. But obviously, we are working within this much bigger picture than just sport. And I guess, as I said earlier, things change every day, but ready we must be, that's for sure.
And in terms of when we do get back playing, obviously you represent very different organisations. Surrey, probably the biggest turnover, host international cricket on a regular basis. Taunton, very popular 2020 grounds, county cricket, a very strong membership down in the southwest. What cricket do you think should be prioritised when we are back playing?
Well, I think what it's important to say is that Somerset's a much bigger cricket club than Surrey is, albeit with a smaller venue. And I'm sure Richard, as a former CEO of Somerset, would agree entirely with that. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you can ask for his comment in a minute on that, just to confirm that to the audience. But joking apart, Look, I think that the reality is, as the ECB have already said, is that they are prioritising all forms of the game at the moment. They're not. They're drafting up schedules that are based on all formats being played over a truncated season, and we're still waiting at the moment for details of what that looks like as we speak.
Yeah, and I think counties need people to come in through the gates. Most people come in through the gates to watch T20 format. And so I think that will be the one that has the biggest priority in terms of the business, and therefore we'll give ourselves the best chance to play as much of that as possible, which means that we will schedule it as late as possible. Prior to that, I could see some championship cricket and some one-day cricket being played behind closed doors to begin with. But also, you think championship cricket, you know, there may be the opportunity to adhere to social guidelines and bring people into the venues. Saw some work last week that indicated that you know, you can stick to social distancing policies outside with 20% of capacity. So the Oval, that could be you know, there could be 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people in the ground. And for a championship match, you know, people, you know, that could be enough. So, you know, I will be doggedly optimistic. We're not going to do anything that is dangerous, clearly, and we're never going to do anything which flouts in the face of government guidelines. But I think you will see more creativity in terms of businesses finding ways to get people back in to do the things they enjoy. Cinemas are already talking about opening in June with reduced capacities. I see no reason why that shouldn't be the same for some sporting venues, particularly because you're outside.
In terms of the formats, the one that you've both studiously avoided, and probably wisely so, is the 100, which was slated for this year. The ECB have invested massively in it. It's been a rocky road to get it launched, and I know you've probably got different views, but what are your views on it being postponed for a year? Should it be reviewed? Should it be scrapped? What are your thoughts? Gordon, perhaps you should go first.
Yeah. Hey, look, I mean, I don't think that there was much choice this year. I think the ECB obviously looked at that very carefully, and it was unrealistic to launch a new tournament in a year such as the one that we're having. And I think that was the correct decision. I don't think many people would argue with that. Where I am on that is, look, the game had decided that the 100 will take place. My job as Chief Executive of Somerset is to ensure that the club benefits to the maximum extent from the delivery of the objectives that it's designed to deliver, extending the reach of the game and ensuring that we benefit from new participants and new audience and all the rest of it. And we need to position ourselves to be ready for that situation as and when it comes.
Yeah, postponing it this year is definitely the right call. But next year is not going to be business as normal either for any sport, and we're going to need to make sure that the game uses its all of its resources in the best ways possible. And its resources are its players, its money, and its supporters' time. And the competition was, I think, due to cost something like 40 million quid this year. Next year, spending that amount of money at a time when many county teams will have far less income than they normally have, which will mean that there are perhaps more players being made redundant, fewer players being signed up. There could be some inconsistencies there that people would be uncomfortable. We certainly would be uncomfortable. We need to make sure that the game's money goes as far as it possibly can. And so, all businesses are looking to see how they can reduce cost and make the most of what they've got. And I'm expecting that to happen within cricket, not just within county cricket, but also within the ECB promoted forms of the game. And there's going to need to be, we're going to need to make sure that the money we spent is delivering what we expect.
And would you prefer to see the ECB and the county shore up the existing structure before embarking on what's a very expensive, untried project?
I think they've already said that they would do that. Tom Harrison said that it's all about protecting the core, and we now need to, make sure that gets delivered, and therefore we're going to need, transparency in terms of when money is being spent, both at county level and venue level and at ECB level. This is not the time for pet projects or ego projects that I may have or that others may have to take priority. We need to make sure that we are fair across the game.
Gordon, would you echo that?
I mean, I don't think anyone would argue with Richard's premise that the game now, as all sport, will need to look at its cost base and look at how it operates and ensure that every pound that comes in is efficiently delivered. Of course, that's got to be right, and that has to be a driving premise across all of the game going forward. And the 100's no exception to that. That I'm sure Tom is looking very carefully at, whilst he's committed to that it's going to happen. I'm sure he's looking very carefully at the costs and how it can be delivered more as efficiently as it possibly can. And I think all sports going to have to look at the way that it operates in terms of its cost base. This isn't 100 related. This is just general sport related. Does it make sense to have all the costs that are currently incurred by cricket and other sports, or could we do it more efficiently? And some radical thinking, as Richard suggests, I think is required across sport. I think
just by way of an example, last year we had two elite teams here. We had Surrey men's team and the Surrey Stars women's team. This year we are due to host 5 elite teams, but each of those 5 elite teams has separate management, separate coaching structures, and all the rest of it. And that's where I can understand why that investment was put in, because it was for very specific reasons. But the situation has changed now, and we need to find a way in which we can make our resources go as far as possible.
You both touched on the sort of parlous state of the game financially and the need for a review. How deep should that review go? Is it now time to look at historically the finances of county cricket in particular? We know that many counties have struggled. Durham were bailed out. Some of the big test match grounds carry a great deal of debt. Is there a possibility, or should there be, a real root and branch review of how cricket is governed, how cricket is run, how cricket is structured? Should we lose some counties? Where are you thinking on that?
Can I take that? Don't think either of us said that cricket's finances were in a perilous state. Actually, cricket's got more money than it's ever had. So I think that's it in context. However, I think what Richard was suggesting, and I was supporting fully, is that given the uncertain times that we're in, this is the ideal time to start looking at, could the game operate more efficiently, because it's had a major shock, as every other sport has. And as yet, we still don't know the extent to the financial damage that will be done to the game, because we haven't got an end date yet clear, and we don't know what consumer behaviours will be once sport gets back to normal. So I think that it's still in a very good place. I think that obviously think there's some prioritization will have to take place as to what the game spends its money on, but that really is very difficult to do, and before you know what the extent of the damage is. So I guess I'm agreeing totally with Richard about the premise that you've got to look at the cost base. Totally agree. How deep do you need to go? Let's wait and see how much the damage is. But there's certain no regret moves anyway. And actually all businesses, and I have to say, Richard has done this extremely well at Surrey over his time there, is to, even in good times, you should be looking at your cost base to ensure it's really fit and healthy. And this is just doing the same thing with a different lens.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the headline is, we've got too many counties, let's get rid of a few. I don't agree with that premise. There are 92 football league clubs in England and Wales, and below that you've probably got another 80 semi-professional clubs. So and we've only got 18 cricket clubs. What I'd be suggesting is that we don't need to reduce the number of clubs. We probably just need to look at the structure that we've got. You could argue that we should have more cricket clubs, but we should adopt some kind of pyramid structure to allow clubs to move up and down depending on how they're managed, how they're resourced, and that's kind of what sports are like. And you see what Exeter Chiefs have done, for example, in rugby. Why couldn't a county such as Cornwall or Buckinghamshire, if it had the same investment, why couldn't it rise up? I think promotion and relegation in sport is hugely powerful, and therefore, if there was going to be some kind of a restructure, I'd rather do it on that basis rather than a closed shop. And I'm saying that from I suppose people say, well, hold a minute, what happens if you got relegated? Sorry, well, if we got relegated, we deserve to get relegated, and it's because we're not doing things well. And therefore, I would much rather find some kind of a rebalance where perhaps more money goes to those that are doing well, but if you're not doing well, you have to reboot and find out how to improve.
How would that impact some of the counties that have been seen as breeding grounds for talent over the years? And you think of player movement now, and there's a premium on domestic players that show a bit of ability, and it's quite a tight market. Would that not just make it easier for the bigger counties, Richard?
It will make it easy for the counties that have got the cash in order to spend, but that's not necessarily the bigger counties. And we see the salary caps that are in play. It depends on where the investment comes in. And, there's been talk over the last week about foreign investment coming into cricket. Well, firstly, I can't see people buying into teams in the 100 because that requires permissions that perhaps won't be that easily forthcoming. Plus, the competition doesn't make a profit. So normally investors buy into something that's going to make a profit. But, it would be nice to see investment coming into the game from other areas in the same way that you do in sport. And my prime example is probably Bristol City, and I spent some time down there, and you've got Steve Lansdown and his family who invested huge amounts of money, not just into the football club, but the rugby club and the basketball club, and indeed the city as a whole. And I think those are really progressive tactics and it would be great to find some way of bringing those into cricket. Having said that, cricket clubs are like football clubs were 50 years ago. They are owned by their communities. They're members-owned organisations. Both Gordon and I, our bosses, are the members of the club, and that's why we've been around for 175 years. It produces huge stability, and it produces the ability for long-term planning. It may mean that you don't make as much money as you need to, but hey, what's money? What's our worst-case scenario if this goes on for a long time? Well, we just go back in terms of history, and we'll end up with a volunteer secretary doing my job, and players earning beer money effectively. But the sport will go on, and that's why sport is such a cool organisation or cool thing to be part of. It's not just business. It means much more than that. It's not about the money.
Gordon, what are your thoughts? Should we be looking at the rugby model and getting some private equity or individual investment in?
I guess that's up for each club to decide what they want to do. But I think that I definitely echo Richard's sentiment, which is, sport is much more than just a business. It's driven by people's emotions and people's sense of affiliation and desire to be affiliated with the same organizations and clubs that their families have been affiliated with over many years. It's not like any other industry in that way. It's an emotionally based industry, which is quite unique, really, and does make it very special. So I think that whilst each club has to make its own decisions, I know which decision I'd like my club to make, and I think the vast majority would.
Okay. Gents, you're both at very different stages of your careers as CEOs in county cricket. Gordon, I'll start with you. Obviously, very unusual circumstances, but how do you approach going into a new organisation in a senior position? What does the first 100 days look like for you as an individual going into somewhere like Somerset?
Well, I had this first 90 days in post plan, which got thrown out after 48 hours, and I've absolutely no idea where that is. It's in a pile of papers somewhere along the line. So I guess this first 90 days is unlike any other is likely to be for any other CEO in cricket going forward. I hope it is anyway. But I mean, my initial objective was just to meet as many people as I could and just listen to what the club means, the background, the history, what's gone before me, what the opportunities are, what the strengths of the organisation, the classic SWOT analysis, I guess, so that you know what you're building on, rather than rushing in, making decisions all very quickly. The unusual thing here is I've had to make some decisions pretty quickly without that knowledge, because that's what you have to do in a crisis. So I'm actually looking forward to my first real 90 days, whenever that comes.
Richard, you've obviously been at the Oval for a good few years now. How do you keep things fresh? How do you keep progressing? How do you keep modifying your approach as a leader?
Make sure I'm scared sufficiently. I remember when I first, I've done 2 chief exec jobs now, and on both days, first day was just so scary, because you've got people looking at you to say what's going to happen next, and I think that's a good thing. You know, I've been here 9 years. I never thought I'd be here this long. I never feel comfortable in the chair that I sit. I'm always, I suppose, a bit of nervous energy, thinking, you know, what more should we be doing? What do we need to do? I think it's just important never to feel comfortable, but also picking up on Gordon's point, just to be really questioning. You know, spend a lot of time with people asking questions, a search for knowledge, and just understanding what goes on, and learn from people around you. And I arrived up here, one of our presidents was a chap called Sir Michael Pickard, and at the club annual general meeting, I'd made some foolish changes to the membership strategy, and at annual general meetings that never goes down very well, and it went really badly wrong. And I got savaged, quite rightly. And the old president came up and said, "Oh, don't worry about that. Oh, you should have seen one of my AGMs." And he said, "The decision I made was to change the colour of the shopping bag." And it was like, "What do you mean change the shopping?" And Gordon will know. What's the big shop in London with the yellow shopping bags, Gordon? I think you probably live nearby. The
Selfridges.
Selfridges. Yeah. He changed the shopping bag from green to yellow, which has now become the iconic element that they've done. But I think, yeah, be really inquisitive and learn from people around you.
I think
What are the key? Sorry,
John, there's a lovely story about sport and emotion, and that what Richard's just articulated there is an example of that. But I'll never forget sitting next to a guy at a dinner in London about 20 years ago, and I was living in the north. And I asked this guy, you know, what football team did he support? Because I like my football as well as my cricket, my rugby, and anything else. And he says, "Oh, I support QPR." And I said to him, why do you support QPR? You know, because in the north, I just see Arsenal, Tottenham, Chelsea. You've got all these teams in London. He said, "Well, I'll tell you what, it's a bit like this." He said, "When I was 4, my dad used to take me to Loftus Road, and we used to get the number, whatever it was, bus. And we used to get off at the Red Lion. And I was allowed in the Red Lion with him, and I had a packet of cheese and onion crisps. And it was the only time of the week where I was allowed crisps. Mum wouldn't let me have them any other time. He had a pint of lager. We walked to Loftus Road, and then we sat in our two seats we've got season tickets for. My dad used to take me, and now I take my son, and it's the same 2 seats." And he said, "In one of these, Goldie, I must have told you this before. Have I bored you with this?" No. He said, in one of the seats, you couldn't see one of the goals because one of those old stanchions that they used to have in stands, right? He said, one of the seats you couldn't see because the stanchion was in front of you. So you had to lean round it to look at the goal. And then Dad and I used to swap which one of us sat in that seat. And he said, "I still take my son to those same 2 seats." And he says, "You know what? If they ever move that stanchion, I'm never going back." And I thought that was an absolute epitome of what sport's about, right? it's about emotions, it's about history, it's about memories, it's about all these things, which makes it so precious to members of clubs in the way that Richard describes. And that has sent some people that Richard and I have worked with over the years into oblivion. They just can't understand it. They hate it. It's just too soft, yeah?
Yeah, it's true. And sometimes when you get sort of business people coming into sport without that emotional understanding, they'll make decisions that might work well for a brand of beer or a fast-moving consumer good, but they won't get to the heart of what the club and the sport means. But they're doing it for good intent. They're trying to take it to the next level, but sometimes you really are best building on the roots that you've got.
Yeah, I used to work with a guy, so right. I mean, I used to work with a guy at Durham when I was up there many years ago. And Frank was his name. He ran a market gardening business and it was extremely successful. And he was also on the committee that decided about contract renewals for players. And he says, I can't do that. He says, I'm hopeless. I'm too emotionally connected to it. He says, I just can't think straight. He's built this massive big business now, made millions of pounds off his market garden business, but ask him to think about sport and he can't do it. So I think Richard's right. You know, you've got to have patience and you've got to have respect for that really special part of what sport's about.
It's an interesting point, Jensen. We, all three of us have worked for various governance models over the years and various individuals. What do you think the ideal model is for governance in county cricket? Should we have more independence? Should it be purely by the members? Should it be a hybrid? What do you think?
There's all sorts of different ways. All of them can work. It's not the system that determines success. It's the people in that system. You can have the best system and the worst people, and it's not going to go anywhere. At Surrey, we have a general committee of 16 people that are elected by the members. We had our general committee election count a couple of weeks ago. We've got 4 new people coming on. So we've got that 16 that sits at the top. Some of them are then on the management board, but we bring in some independent advice and guidance from the management board. And that's who I report to on a monthly basis. But of course, we're always cognizant that we have the general committee, effectively the supporters of the club, that we all report into. So we need to make sure that we don't take too many right turns.
Gordon, what are your thoughts, having worked for the ECB, where they've changed to a purely independent board, and now back in county cricket where you started with a members committee?
Yeah, well, I guess it depends how you define independent, because actually the majority of ECB's directors have to have been involved in the game over the last 4 years in some way or another, so that you could claim in some people would claim that that's genuinely independent, and some would say it's not. And there's other institutions, other organizations that have defined independence much more harshly than that. I totally echo what Richard says. It's not so much about the structure, it's about the people. And what I do feel strongly about is you need to have a balance of the two. It would be wrong to, I remember speaking to a chief exec of a overseas cricket board, national governing body, who I'll not mention for fear of embarrassing them. And he said, we've got this completely independent board, but they're far too distant from the realities. And then I would speak to someone else and they would say, we've got these representatives of the game and they're so conflicted. And the answer, of course, is somewhere between the two. But the most important thing is, as Richard suggests, is you've got to have the right people and with a balance and a good spread of knowledge, skills and experience. That's where the best boards come from. And I'm big fan of more diversity on boards and to have different types of thinking, so that you don't just go down the cul-de-sac of being relevant to one section of society, because if you do that, then you shrink. Having a broad set of skills and knowledge, I think, and backgrounds is a very good thing for sport.
Final question for you both. You've reached the dizzy heights of chief executive level in a sport, and a lot of the people watching this will be interested in developing a career. What advice would you give, and what qualities do you think they need to develop?
Well, I haven't got many definable skills because I came from a sort of an army background, so I didn't have a great commercial background. I think ultimately what pulls me through is a little bit of leadership and a lot of hard work in terms of trying to think things through. If you've got a talented team, and I think Gordon and I are both lucky enough to work for talented teams, you've got to stay one step ahead of them. And I'm not going to do that by brain power, so I have to do it by thought, process, hard work, and consideration, and make sure that when I'm proposing a possible course of action, I've thought it through in huge detail, so I don't get caught out and made to look silly, which does happen more regularly than you would think.
Gordon?
I think, well, my friend's being very modest there, by the way. He's got quite a lot of definable skills, not least leadership, but others as well. I think I always think about four things when I employ anyone, and I stole it from Alex Ferguson many years ago when he said you need four things in any employee. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter if it's my PA or my goalkeeper or my manager. It's commitment, complete commitment to what you do, competence and the skill set that you need for that particular role, loyalty to the organization and the institution, and an appetite to get better. And if you have those four things, you don't very often go wrong. And if you actually think about those four with people you work with and know, it usually confirms what your gut feel tells you about those individuals. And I think it's the same for chief executives. I think that you've got to carry those four with you. And also, what you're going to be prepared to do is to make decisions, because every decision ultimately comes back to you.
And final one, if we're sat here again in 12 months' time, what does the cricket landscape look like?
Surrey have been relegated. Have won the championship and the T20 Blast and the Royal London One Day Cup. And the game is growing beyond belief in the southwest of England, and Somerset are at the heart of that. But I say that flippantly, and a more serious answer would be that we have adjusted to a new normality, and that we have got sport back at the heart of people's diaries in the summer, and whether that's playing it, watching it, or following it through media, and that really is the most important thing for me.
Richard, final word for you.
We've got a rebuilding job to do. I think even if we get through this this summer in the best way possible, I think it's probably knocked us back 3 or 4 years, both as a club and perhaps as a sport. And we need to go back and work really hard. You remember, we were coming into this year on the back of World Cup and a Headingley Test match that will be forever remembered. Attendances were an all-time high last year in the Blast. County cricket was on an absolute flyer, and we were seeing really strong interest this year. That's all stopped, as Gordon has said. It's all completely stopped, and we must not take it for granted that people will just switch back onto us. We've got to work really hard to encourage them to come back and follow the sport and play the sport.
Excellent. Thanks, gents. Tim, over to you for any questions that we've received while we've been on air.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really insightful, both of you. Clarity you presented there with the commerciality, the acumen was amazing sort of stuff, the kind of things we were expecting some of the delegates to pick up and work with. So one of the questions that's come through is from Stefan. He says, hi both, in your opinion, to be a good CEO, do you have to be a good all-rounder, i.e. finance, sales, marketing, understanding, or do you think you can specialize in one or two and then rely on a good team to help you with your weak points? Can we go to Richard? You're nodding there. It's like you're a concurrence for him.
Yeah, I'd go. You can do it both ways, but it helps if you have got a specific skill. Maybe, and most come through either from the commercial background or the finance background. I mean, you see more finance in football clubs that are struggling for cash because the chairman wants a chief exec that understands the numbers. If you're working for a club that is intent on growth, then you'll see more of a commercially minded chief exec. So I think it does help to have a speciality, but you can otherwise do it as a generalist if you've got a good team to operate on. And numbers, finances are not my strong point. I thought that was going to be an issue, but in truth, I make most of the decisions based on common sense, judgment, doing the right thing. And if you manage to deliver that, then the numbers tend to go in the right direction anyway, so you don't have to focus on them too much.
Very good. That's excellent. Gordon, would you
Yeah,
agree with that?
I'd certainly agree with all that. And I think the only point I would add is I think it's really important to understand what your strengths are and what your limitations are. And if you're not strong on finance, you need someone that is. So you don't necessarily, you need to just dial up and dial down the people around you, depending on your strengths and your own limitations.
Very good. And thank you both for...
Tim, if I could just come in on that one.
Yeah, go for it.
I'd agree with what both the guys have said there. And from my experience, my first chief exec's job, I joined an organisation that was probably 6 months from being the first county cricket club to go bust in a big way. And I didn't have much of a clue about finance. And this was Derbyshire back in the mid 2000s, when there wasn't the money that was in the game that there is now. And I think it's essential that you surround yourself with the very best people that you can and take really good advice on them, whether that's your executive team or whether you bring in independent advisors or non-exec directors in whatever capacity you can. That's the best way of approaching it.
That's really good advice from all three of you. I think what we're trying to do with VSI and the delegates is it's interesting how we bring with people who've got a sporting background or have got an athletic mindset and that discipline, and then they learning the acumen that kind of sits beside that as an organization, of the skills and building those things in. Yet it seldom works the other way. I think you mentioned it before, where you get someone that's been really good in business, they've been really successful, and then when they enter into a sporting organisation, they tend to leave all the business acumen at the door and run from the heart. Whereas I think there's a little bit more of a balanced approach. If you've been involved in the sport for a number of years, I think you get that, you get the passion, you get the thing that goes behind it. If you were looking for to develop a talent pipeline that sits behind you. So this is probably one of the things where we look at ego versus task sort of best for the organization. If you were to leave a legacy and find someone that was going to be your next talent, how would you develop them and how would you recognize the skills gap?
We have a policy with throughout our organization in that if we want to know what people want to do next, so go from the players. It's lovely when we get a player playing for Surrey, but actually we want them to play for England. It will be the same with one of our commercial team or operations teams. We're relatively small businesses, so there is a tendency for it to be dead men's shoes. And to be honest, once you're working for a sports club, it's really good fun. You don't really want to move on unless you get sacked. That's where the scared element comes in. So then you need to find a way of channeling that talent, not necessarily just within the organisation, but outside. And so we are always trying to find our staff better jobs. If there's a commercial guy or a girl who want to move off and do something, we will use our network to try and find opportunities for them. Often they don't end up taking them, hopefully, because they've got a nice working relationship here and they enjoy working for the club. But it's clubs are relatively small businesses, but as a sports sector, it's growing and it's becoming a recognised sector now. 10 years ago, sport was not the professional sector it is now. The Americans were really leading the way, and so I think you've got to be prepared in your career to move to different places to find the right opportunities to sort of plot your career and plot what you want to do through.
Okay. Gordon, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, the other thing I would add is that the type of chief exec you need depends on the organisation and its stage of development. I've seen a number of chief execs go into an organisation and create and provide a very direct, a very forthright, almost authoritarian type leadership, because that's what was necessary because of the place. But then when the thing gets on its feet, when they've got it back on its feet, you need a different type of leader who is perhaps more of an engagement person than someone who knocks walls down to get things done. So I think it depends on that, and also I think the key ingredient for anyone or attribute for anyone is going back to the faire du four, as I call them, is having that appetite to get better. If someone doesn't have that core ingredient, you're wasting your time. So you've got to make sure that is in any potential young leader.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's something he was very keen about, wasn't it? I think the word he used was teachability, if I remember rightly. I kind of stick with me for forever. Tom, would you add anything to that, or they kind of sat? I mean, you've done the role, you recruited for those roles.
Yeah, a lot of what the guy says sort of resonates with my career path, if you like, in terms of what Richard said around moving around. You know, my career path took me from here over to New Zealand, to Africa, to Ireland, to run and work in various organisations, and you know, it's afforded me fantastic opportunities. But it also gives you a more rounded understanding of how different sports organisations work, how different cultures work. And to echo what Gordon says as well, you know, fully agree with his points. It's about constantly learning, constantly developing, but also finding the right person for the right job. You know, back to the example I gave a few minutes ago, I think I was probably the right person to deal with that situation and make some hard decisions quite quickly. But was I the right person to lead it for the next 5 years? Absolutely not. It needed a different type of chief executive.
Okay, very good. And one final thing that I'm going to put you on the spot is that clearly the collaborative approach that you guys have got, considering that you're kind of running, I wouldn't say separate arms, but separate counties, various things, and different roles and responsibility. The one thing that is quite clear is the collaborative approach that you've got and the camaraderie that sits between you. What can other sports learn from cricket?
I think it's fairly unique in cricket, in truth. I remember going to chairman and chief execs meetings of the Football League, and they were hilarious. You'd have Theo Paphitis and Simon Jordan and Karen Brady muscling in on what they regarded as the power positions, because you'd have 70 odd people around a table. They'd make sure they sat at the head of the table, and then everybody just sort of argued for the next couple of hours. Whereas in cricket, it's much more collaborative, and that's largely due to Gordon and the role that he was doing prior to this, which was effectively MD of county cricket, trying to get the best out of us. And how much of a challenge was that, Gordon?
I was a walk in the park, as you know. I think that it's I haven't had the privilege of working in football or another sport like Richard has, but I think it's really important for any sport to understand that every club's different. And I think that's the bit in my previous job that was the biggest challenge, but also the most rewarding thing. Because if you can respect that everybody's challenges are different and then come up with a model that supports them deliver their opportunities, you're in a pretty good place. It's not always easy, but you've got to start from everybody's different. That's the main thing.
Really good advice. Tom, just to wrap things up before we kind of wrap up and head off and say our preliminaries goodbye, etc. Have you got anything finally you want to add to that?
No, I think the guys have covered an awful lot of ground there, and it's great learning from people that have done the job, succeeded in the job, and getting a real insight into current situations and real life situations. So I thank you both for your time, gents, and I look forward to seeing you very soon to watch some cricket, hopefully.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you both, guys.
Cheers.
See you next week.